They say neighborhoods are supposed to feel safe. But mine turned into a battlefield when my HOA president decided she could control me with threats. Cut 2 image clip of leather-clad bikers riding in. She sent bikers and outlaw crew to circle my land, to scare me into submission.
Ow.
But what Karen didn't know was that I'm Delta Force. Quick cut. Boots crunching gravel, bikers dismounting. They marched onto my driveway, ready to fight. What they got? The wrong man? Fast montage. Quick flashes of takedowns, bikers on the ground, deputies arriving in under a minute. They were down groaning in cuffs, body cams rolling. And Karen, she got exposed, misusing HOA funds, conspiring with criminals and abusing power. Final shot, peaceful sunset over the ranch. Her reign collapsed. The neighborhood finally. Learned bullies only win when good people stay quiet. She wanted a war, but I don't lose battles. Not overseas, and sure as hell not in my own neighborhood. They say neighborhoods are supposed to feel safe or refuge. A slice of order where families grow, children play, and the most heated argument you'll ever face is about whose dog is barking too loudly. But mine had turned into a battlefield the moment the HOA president decided I was her enemy.
Ow.
She thought she could control me with letters, fines, and thinly veiled threats. What she didn't realize was that sending bikers after me was the biggest mistake of her life. It all started with Marlene Harding. 2 outsiders. She was just another retiree with a pastel windbreaker zipped up to her chin and a clipboard never far from her hands. But to us, who lived under her reign, she was a tyrant in sneakers. Marlene didn't just run the HOA, treated it like her personal empire. She appeared unannounced on people's property, snapped photos of violations, slapped notices on doors as if she were a judge handing down sentences. The morning she came to my ranch, I was fixing the irrigation pump by the barn. She stood there like she owned the place, that fake smile plastered across her face. You know, she said in a voice sweet enough to rot teeth, that barn equipment of yours really drags down the neighborhood aesthetic. Some of us are starting to think you don't respect the community. I didn't even look up from the wrench in my hand. It's a ranch, Marlene. That equipment keeps this land running. Her smile didn't falter. Communities only work when everyone follows the rules. Ignore them long enough, and people might think you don't belong here. That word belong wasn't about bylaws. It was about power. She wanted me to bend, to accept her as queen of the cul-de-sac, and I wasn't about to. At the next HOA meeting, I decided enough was enough. Folding chairs lined the community room, neighbors murmuring as they sipped bad coffee from styrofoam cups. Marlene stood at the front, her PowerPoint glowing with bullet points about community harmony. I waited until she was mid-sentence before standing up. Marlene, I said, holding up the violation notice she'd sent me. Since when? Does this HOA have a director of security enforcement? The room shifted instantly. Neighbors looked around, whispering. The title was printed clearly under her signature, and no one had ever heard of such a position. It's a necessary role, she said smoothly, for handling difficult residents. That's not in the bylaws, I shot back. And HOA rules don't give you the right to invent authority whenever you feel like it. You could have heard a pin drop. Marlene's face tightened, her folder snapping shut like a gavel. At her eyes narrowed, predator sharp. This, she hissed, before storming out. That night, the first message came. My mailbox wasn't smashed, wasn't vandalized. It was bent at a precise angle, deliberate. The next morning, heavy boot prints cut across my pasture. And by sundown, someone had nailed a black skull charm onto my barn door. Not random graffiti, a marker. One used by outlaw biker crews. At dawn the following day, I heard them before. I saw them. 6 motorcycles, engines rumbling low, gliding past my gate in single file. Not a word, not a glance, just presence. This wasn't intimidation. This was declaration. In that moment, I knew. Marlene had escalated the game. The morning after the bikers circled my property, I walked straight into the next HOA meeting. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Neighbors avoided my eyes, whispering into their coffee cups, pretending nothing was wrong. But their shoulders were stiff, their gazes darting toward the windows. Toward me, toward Marlene. They'd all seen the motorcycles. They just didn't want to admit it. Marlene sat at the head of the folding table like a queen on her throne, sunglasses perched on her head, sipping from a plastic water bottle with the composure of someone untouchable. She even had the nerve to smirk when our eyes met. I didn't wait for her carefully curated agenda. Cut the act, Marlene. We're the bikers. Her smile twitched but quickly recovered. Excuse me? Ah! The 6 men on motorcycles who paraded past my land yesterday, they didn't just wander here. They were sent by you. Gasps rippled through the room. An older man in the back muttered, I saw them too. The spell of silence cracked. Marlene leaned forward, voice dropping. This community has expectations. When you ignore them, sometimes people outside the bylaws take notice.
That.
Right there was the slip I needed. She had practically admitted to conspiring against me. You just confirmed it, I said loudly, turning so everyone could hear. You're guilty of criminal conspiracy under 18 U.S. Code 241 and having them trespass on my land? That's state-level trespassing, stacked on top of federal charges. Murmurs filled the room.
Ow.
Some people looked outraged, others terrified. But Marlene, she just smirked harder like she knew something they didn't. Call it what you want. Around here, nobody's going to side with you over the board. The way she said board made my gut twist. She wasn't bluffing. She had enablers, maybe even people on that very table who were too afraid to resist her. I slammed the violation. Notice down so hard, the table rattled. This ends now. Or the sheriff hears every word you just said. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Just a flicker. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, her voice turning venomous. Fine, you want to fight? You'll get one. Just don't cry when you can't handle the consequences. I walked out before she could finish, because I already knew what was waiting. That afternoon, the bikers returned. But this time they didn't just ride past. They parked. Engines cut, boots hit gravel, leather jackets creaked as 6 men dismounted. In formation, their patches glinted in the sun. Unmistakable emblems of an outlaw crew. This wasn't posturing anymore, this was a siege. One of them, a broad man with a scar carved down his cheek, spat on my driveway and stepped forward. You Harding? I growled. No, I said evenly, meeting his stare. I own this land. You're trespassing. Scarface smirked, a toothpick. Rolling between his teeth? Not for long. HOA says you're done here. My fists itched to move, but I kept my voice calm. Let me explain something to you. Under Texas Penal Code 30.05, the moment you cross that fence line after being told to leave, you're guilty of criminal trespass. And since you're acting on her behalf, that makes it conspiracy. Federal and state law, stacked. You ready for that? They laughed. Low, humorless. The kind of laugh that meant they weren't hired for their brains. These weren't punks, they were mercenaries paid muscle, and in that moment it hit me. Marlene hadn't just crossed a line. She had declared war. I turned back toward the house, walking slow, calm as if I had all the time in the world. My boots crunched on the gravel. My pulse steady. Because if Marlene wanted a war, she had picked the wrong man to start one with. The bikers didn't leave. They camped at the end of my road like vultures circling a carcass, their engines rumbling low at all hours, reminding everyone who was in charge, or at least who they thought was in charge. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers spreading like brush fire. Some avoided me entirely, afraid of being caught in Marlene's crosshairs. Others gave me the look you give a man already marked for death. And Marlene? She strutted through the neighborhood. With sunglasses perched high and that smug grin carved into her face, she waved at kids, gave gardening tips to retirees, and pretended the sight of 6 leather-clad thugs on Harleys was just part of community safety. She acted untouchable. That was the last straw. I wasn't just some rancher she could intimidate. I wasn't some retiree, too scared to speak up. I'd commanded men in combat zones. I'd faced down warlords who thought fear alone could break a community. Marlene didn't realize it yet, but she had poked a hornet's nest. So I made a call. Not to the sheriff, not to county code enforcement. I dialed numbers that weren't written down, Anywhere numbers that only mattered to men who had bled together. Men who didn't need explanations. By noon the next day, 3 black trucks rolled down my driveway. Dust rose behind them as they parked, doors opening in near-perfect unison. Out stepped my old platoon, Ramirez, the joker who could disarm a mine with one hand and a cigarette. In the other, Johnson, silent as stone, a man who once pulled me out of an ambush with nothing but grit. In Collins, sharped and steady, a sniper whose calm was scarier than most men's rage. Civilian clothes, sure, but the same lethal focus. The air itself seemed to shift. The neighbors who had been hiding peeked again, but this time their eyes widened. They didn't know who these men were, but they could feel it. Soldiers carried a weight and energy. My brothers carried it like second skin. Marlene was on her porch when she saw them. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She shouted across the street, her voice shrill. "You can't bring your army here?" "It's not an army," I called back. "It's family. And unlike your hired thugs, they're here legally." The bikers didn't like that. Engines roared, echoing off the houses, a guttural chorus meant to intimidate. My men didn't flinch. Ramirez leaned close to me, muttering, "Want us to handle this the usual way?" "Hold," I said, my voice loud enough for the bikers to hear. "We do this by the book." But Scarface and his crew weren't listening. They started advancing, boots crunching gravel as they crossed the fence line. I'd already warned them. Once that was all the law required. They wanted war. They just stepped into one. Scarface came at me first, swinging wide with a meaty fist. I moved faster than he expected, caught his wrist, twisted, and drove him face first into the dirt. His growl turned into a grunt as I locked him down. Another rushed me, but a knee to the gut folded him in half, and a hip throw sent him sprawling. Behind me, my brothers worked with surgical precision. Johnson dropped 2 men with brutal efficiency-controlled strikes, nothing wasted. Collins flipped one over the hood of a truck, then pinned him before he even knew what happened. Ramirez, grinning like a wolf, had the last one on the ground before the man even finished his first swing. It was over in under a minute. 6 bikers, who had thought themselves wolves, now lay groaning in the gravel, broken down and helpless. My men stood calm, collected, not a scratch on them. And just as the dust settled, red and blue lights flashed down the road. The sheriff's cruisers finally rolled in, too late to stop anything but just in time to witness everything. The deputies stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. They froze when they saw the scene. 6 bikers restrained, my men standing. Tall me with Scarface pinned in the dirt. I released him and raised my hands, calm. They crossed the line after being warned. Everything was by the book. The deputies cuffed the bikers, separating them one by one. And that's when the cracks appeared. One biker muttered, "Karen promised we wouldn't get caught." Another cursed her name outright, spitting blame like venom. The deputies. Body cams caught every word. Clean, solid evidence. Marlene wasn't just losing control, she was about to lose everything. The sheriff's deputies worked quick, hauling Scarface and his crew to their feet, locking handcuffs tight around their wrists. The outlaw swagger they'd carried evaporated, replaced by curses and excuses. Their engines still ticked as they cooled, but the intimidation was gone. They were just men caught red-handed. Neighbors who had been hiding behind blinds finally spilled into the street, murmuring in shock. They had seen the bikers roll in with confidence, and now they were watching them get stuffed into the back of patrol cars. Some looked at me differently, like they were finally realizing the nightmare Marlene had unleashed wasn't unstoppable. The sheriff, a grizzled man with a tan line from his hat and eyes that missed nothing, approached me. "You said they trespassed after being warned?" I nodded. "Texas Penal Code 3005. They crossed the line after being told to leave. They did it acting on behalf of Marlene Harding." He raised an eyebrow. "Can prove that?" He didn't have to wait long for an answer. One of the bikers, furious at being cuffed, snarled. Loud enough for half the block to hear, "Karen promised us money from the HOA slush fund. Said she'd cover us if it went south." Another chimed in. "She told us this guy was a threat. Said the board wanted him gone." The sheriff's deputy smiled faintly, tapping his body cam. Got it all recorded. By nightfall, Marlene's kingdom began to crumble. The deputies executed a warrant on the HOA office, Boxes of paperwork carried out under flashing lights. Receipts, altered budgets, and checks made out to cash all of it pointed back to her. HOA funds weren't just misused. They'd been siphoned into the pockets of hired muscle. The next HOA meeting was unlike any before. No PowerPoints, no smug lectures about harmony. Just a board of shaken members who could barely look me in the eye. When the sheriff escorted Marlene in wearing cuffs, whispers rippled through the room like a storm surge. Her pastel windbreaker was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit, but the venom in her eyes hadn't dulled. She scanned the room until her glare locked on me. "You think this is over?" she hissed. Did Dodden rise to the bait? I simply held up the violation notice she had once waved like a weapon. "You're finished, Marlene. The board votes tonight." And they did. Unanimous. Effective immediately. She was barred from holding any position of authority, stripped of every title she had ever invented. The sheriff listed her charges: criminal conspiracy, solicitation of assault, misuse of HOA, funds, harassment. Each word landed like a nail in the coffin of her reign. The bikers took plea deals, avoiding long sentences but leaving with criminal records that would follow them forever. Marlene, though, wasn't as lucky. Her empire had collapsed, her power reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered at block parties. When the dust finally settled, the same neighbors who once avoided my eyes came to my porch. Some shook my hand. Others brought casseroles, as if comfort food could erase weeks of fear. I didn't gloat, didn't lecture, only said the truth. Bullies only win when good people stay quiet. That night, my old platoon and I sat on the porch, the cicadas buzzing in the humid air. For once, the neighborhood was silent. No engines, no threats, no Karen marching across lawns like a dictator. Just peace. Marlene had wanted a war, but she forgot something crucial. Wars aren't won by intimidation, by clipboards, or by mercenaries. On motorcycles, they're won by resolve, by unity, by refusing to bow, and I don't lose battles. Not overseas, and sure as hell not in my own neighborhood.